Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Mr. White here with part 2 of your spring semester final exam review for world history class. So go ahead and get out your final exam review paper. We left off on the political revolution section, which is on the first page, number 17. And I know you don't have time to waste, and neither do I, so let's just get right into it. Here we go, number 17. Why are Louis XIV of France and James I and Charles I of England considered absolute rulers? Well, the reason why is because they made political decisions without the consent of their people. You may remember that they kind of just did whatever they wanted. They didn't care what the people thought about it. All right, number 18. In an absolute monarchy, where did the power of the nation lie? Well, an absolute ruler has absolute power. So all the power of the nation was in the hands of the monarch. Nobody else had power. There was no power for the people. All right, number 19. What were John Locke's natural rights, and what did he feel the government should do with those rights? Well, for John Locke, he was the guy who coined the phrase life, liberty, and property. Okay, so when you see life, liberty, and property, you should be thinking about John Locke and what he considered to be natural rights. Okay, now he thought that the government should protect those rights, and any government that doesn't protect those rights ought to be overthrown by its people. All right, so number 20. What did Enlightenment thinkers feel should happen if a government denies its people its rights? Well, I think I kind of just told you the answer to that one. A government that denies the people's rights ought to be overthrown. That's what the Enlightenment thinkers taught people. All right, number 21. Which Enlightenment idea about rights of citizens most influenced the American and French revolutions? Well, they were influenced by a guarantee of basic human rights. And we've talked a lot about human rights, so that means things like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, the freedom to own private property, popular sovereignty of the people, where people have power to rule their own government, and also equality under the law. Those were all really important rights that the thinkers of the Enlightenment felt were natural and therefore unalienable, meaning nobody can take them away. All right, so number 22. Who did the American and French revolutions inspire? Well, if you watch my other videos on this YouTube page, you should remember that the American and French revolutions inspired revolutions in Latin America. In case you don't remember what Latin America means, it's all the parts of North and South America that speak Spanish, French, or Portuguese as their main language. So we're talking about places like Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, etc. Okay? So let's see. Number 23. What is the idea of separation of powers? That's the idea that the government should have its power divided into separate but equal branches. So for example, the executive branch, they enforce the law. The legislative branch, they're the ones who make the law. And then the judicial branch are the ones who judge whether or not the laws are fair and match up with our Constitution. All right, so number 24. Why did many French people support Napoleon? Well, the reason why was that they thought that Napoleon could bring more stability to France and also defeat France's enemies. You may remember that the French Revolution was a very, very turbulent time, and the people wanted a strong leader who could set things right. All right, so number 25. From where did Jean-Jacques Rousseau and John Locke believe a government gets its power? Well, if you've been paying attention on this review, it should be pretty obvious. They would say that the power comes from the people. So to them, the power of the government should only come from the consent of the governed, the people who have to listen to the laws of the government. All right, now number 26. Who were Simón Bolívar, José de San Martín, and Toussaint Louverture? Well, these guys were some of those leaders of the Latin American independence movements. They were the people that were inspired by the Enlightenment and took those ideas to change their countries, like Haiti and Colombia and Argentina. All right, so number 27. Which European movement most influenced the Declaration of Independence and the Declaration of the Rights of Man? That was the Enlightenment. So anything that talks about the Declaration of Rights, political revolutions, if it asks what influenced those things, most likely it's going to be the Enlightenment. All right, number 28. What is popular sovereignty? Popular sovereignty simply means power to the people. Simple, right? Yeah, it is a pretty simple concept. So it's the idea that the government gets its power from the governed. from the consent of the people. All right, so number 29. What was the Enlightenment? The Enlightenment was a time period when people began to question long-held beliefs about science and society and the government. This was the time with guys like Rousseau and John Locke and Voltaire, all of these great thinkers, mostly from Europe, who started to kind of question this idea of absolute rule and started advocating for more rights and freedoms for the people of the world. All right, so number 30. What did taxation without representation mean? Well, it's pretty simple. It just means that the government is taxing you without your consent. The people don't have a right to vote for the people who make the laws and pass these taxes, and so that's what we call taxation without representation. You may remember that was one of the main rallying cries of the American Revolution, the idea that there should be no taxation without representation of the people in government. All right, so number 31. What were some economic causes of the American Revolution, and what were some economic causes of the French Revolution? Let's talk about the American first. For the American Revolution, you might remember that the Americans were living in colonies. At that time, the colonies were governed by something called mercantilism. Mercantilism was an economic system where the colonies only existed to benefit the mother country. So England got rich, but the colonies didn't get much benefit. Something else that happened was that the government of Britain was passing very high taxes on all of the colonists. And you may remember, like we just talked about, the colonists didn't have any say in the taxes. And so that was a big-time economic concern that led to the American Revolution. Another one was that through mercantilism, the colonies were forced to trade only with England. So that meant that if you were a cotton farmer in Virginia, you could only sell your cotton to British companies. And then when you went to the store to go buy new clothes, all the clothes in the store had to be made in Britain. So the people didn't have any freedom to choose who they could sell to or who they could buy from. All right, now in France, it was a little different. For one thing, you may remember that they had those different estates. The estates were like the different social classes. And the top two estates, the clergy and the nobility, paid almost no taxes. But the third estate, they were the poor people, and they paid all the taxes. Okay? The other thing was that France had acquired heavy debt from fighting in wars for a few hundred years. So all those wars that were caused by the monarchy put the country in a really bad financial situation. And there was also a very high cost of living in France at the time. Everything was really expensive. And to make matters worse, the monarchy was extremely wasteful. You may remember that King Louis and his queen Marie Antoinette spent very lavishly. Meanwhile, most people in France were living in poverty. So those were some of the economic causes of the American and French revolutions. All right, and last but not least, number 32. Why was the National Assembly created in France, and what kind of government did they set up? Well, you may remember that in France, like I just said, they had a big-time economic crisis. The country was in a lot of debt, the poor people were paying all the taxes, and the monarchy was extremely wasteful. So King Louis called a meeting known as the Estates General, where all three estates came together to try to work out the problems. Unfortunately, the first and second estate, meaning the nobles and the clergy, didn't want to listen to the third estate, and they didn't agree to make equal taxes for everybody. So what happened was the third estate left the meeting and decided to set up their own government, which they called the National Assembly. And the idea of this National Assembly was to keep a monarchy, but it was going to be a limited monarchy. And the people would actually have more equality and more rights to basically have a say in the government. Okay, well there we go. This is the end of video 2. The next video will be about the economic and social revolutions, which starts with number 33. So stay tuned for the next video, and good luck on your final.